Berlin, February 3, 1944. The city lay under a pale winter haze. Smoke from 1,000 chimneys drifting above frozen rooftops. Church bells had just finished their morning chime when the first distant thunder rolled across the sky. It wasn't the sound of weather. It was a hum, steady, layered, mechanical, growing louder with every heartbeat. German civilians looked upward, squinting through the gray, searching for the storm. High above the clouds, sunlight caught the silver bellies of aircraft. Dozens became hundreds. Their formation was flawless, geometric, disciplined. 4 engines each, moving like a single organism. The deep pulse of the B-17 flying fortress had arrived over Berlin. Anti-aircraft gunners gripped their flak guns, whispering the same words they'd used for months. Langsam. Zu langsam. Too slow. Too heavy. They laughed at the lumbering bombers that dared to challenge the Reich's airspace. But within minutes, laughter would fade beneath the scream of sirens and the trembling earth. The sound that once seemed slow would become unstoppable. The sky over Berlin was no longer blue. It was about to turn to fire. In the early years of the war, the Luftwaffe ruled the skies of Europe. German pilots, trained in precision and discipline, believed air supremacy was their birthright. They had swept across Poland, crushed France, and brought Britain to its knees with their relentless raids. To them, air warfare was speed, agility, and domination through fear. The idea of a massive, slow-moving bomber fleet seemed absurd, even laughable. In Luftwaffe flight schools, instructors mocked American designs, especially the Boeing B-17. They called it der fliegende Sarg, the flying coffin. Too bulky, too easy a target. The Germans had faith in their Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s. Speed and maneuverability were their creed. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, another philosophy was taking shape. In American hangars, engineers and military strategists envisioned a war fought not by daring solo aces, but by unstoppable machines, precision-built, mass-produced, and flown in unity. Factories in Seattle, Long Beach, and Wichita thundered day and night. Every rivet and bolt in a B-17 reflected industrial power on a scale Germany could never match. Each flying fortress carried 4 Wright Cyclone engines, 13 machine guns, and 10 men who trusted steel more than luck. When the U.S. Army Air Forces sent them into daylight bombing campaigns over Europe, it wasn't just a tactic, it was a statement. By 1943, the 8th Air Force had grown from an experiment into a symbol of determination. Their mission: cripple German industry. Daylight after daylight, no matter the cost. The German pilots still smiled, believing the Americans would break first. They didn't know the Americans were preparing to bring the war to the heart of Berlin itself. By late 1943, the hum of radial engines filled the English countryside every morning. Airfields from Norfolk to Suffolk transformed into cities of metal and motion. Hundreds of B-17s stood in formation, gleaming under the pale dawn light, their silver skins glinting like mirrors of purpose. Crews gathered around mission boards, eyes scanning red lines stretching deep into occupied Europe. Regensburg, Schweinfurt, Bremen, and soon, Berlin. At first, the Luftwaffe had dismissed the Americans' daylight raids as reckless bravado, but the strategy carried a deeper logic, one built on precision. Unlike the night bombings of the RAF, the U.S. believed in striking the enemy's industrial heart under full daylight, guided by the revolutionary Norden bomb sight. It promised accuracy within a few hundred feet from 6 miles up, an invention that blurred the line between engineering and faith. As the bombing campaign intensified, German commanders began to grasp the scale of the challenge. Each B-17 carried not just bombs but a message that America's war machine could reach anywhere, anytime. The Reich's once secure skies were now streaked with contrails of defiance. Still, Berlin was different. The capital was not just a target, it was a symbol. To strike it was to challenge the regime's illusion of invincibility. On March 6, 1944, that illusion began to crumble. At 8:30 a.m., Radar stations along the German coast detected a vast armada approaching from the northwest. Hundreds of dots filled the screens. The Luftwaffe scrambled every available fighter. Pilots took off, confident they'd scatter the intruders as before. But when they rose above the clouds, they didn't find a few slow bombers. They found an entire sky filled with fortresses. From the ground, the B-17s looked eternal, a wall of silver stretching from one horizon to another. To the German pilots climbing to meet them, the sight was both mesmerizing and terrifying. This was not air combat as they knew it. This was industrialized warfare, lifted into the sky. The Luftwaffe's veterans had spent years fighting over Europe in tight formations of swift fighters. Their confidence forged in early victories. They were trained to hunt, not to confront flying fortresses head-on. But that day, over Berlin, the Americans brought something new: discipline in geometry. Each formation of B-17s moved like a living grid. The bombers flew in tight, overlapping boxes. Hundreds of guns synchronized to protect each other. Every approach angle was covered. Each gap in the sky spat out tracer fire. It wasn't a squadron. It was a fortress made of hundreds of men and 1,000 machine guns. German ace Oberstleutnant Wilhelm Steinmann later wrote, "We were no longer fighting airplanes. We were fighting a city in the sky. Inside those fortresses, the world was deafening. Gunners fired until the barrels glowed red. Frost rimed the oxygen masks. The cold could freeze skin in seconds. But the men held formation. To break rank was death, not only for them but for those around them." Below, the city of Berlin waited, defiant, proud, unaware that its skyline was about to change forever. From 25,000 feet, bomb bays opened with mechanical precision. Each plane released 12 500-pound bombs. Thousands fell through the icy air, their whistles merging into a single, unending sound. The sound that would come to symbolize the war's turning point. The steady, rising howl of gravity and vengeance. For the first time, the people of Berlin looked up and saw not isolated raiders but an empire's fury, flying in daylight, and for the first time, German pilots realized the sky no longer belonged to them. To the Americans, the B-17 was more than a weapon. It was a declaration of belief. In its aluminum skin and roaring engines lived the promise that technology, discipline, and faith in industry could overcome tyranny. It wasn't designed merely to drop bombs. It was built to prove that daylight precision could shorten a war, that democracy could strike with both moral clarity and mechanical force. Every fortress carried a Norden bomb sight, a secret instrument of extraordinary precision. Crews were sworn to destroy it if captured. Through its glass, bombardiers could guide their payloads onto rail yards, factories, and power plants, the arteries of the Reich. It was science turned into a moral weapon, meant to wound the war machine, not the people. But ideals met reality in the smoke. Bombs missed targets. Entire neighborhoods vanished. Every error etched new guilt into the American conscience. Still, the mission persisted, because strategy demanded it, and survival depended on momentum. The German High Command underestimated that persistence. They believed no nation would endure such losses. In 1943 alone, more than 2,800 B-17s were shot down. Yet the factories in Kansas and Seattle replaced them faster than they fell. For every fortress that burned, 2 more took its place. In that repetition, in that unending hum of production, lay the symbol of American strength: steel abundance. The hum of factories became the sound of defiance, the heartbeat of democracy echoing across oceans. Soon, even the Luftwaffe aces knew it. They weren't fighting men anymore. They were fighting a system, one powered by freedom and built on assembly lines. By late 1944, the sky above Germany had become a crucible. Berlin, once untouchable, now trembled under the distant rumble of approaching engines. At dawn, radar stations detected them first. A wall of silver, miles wide, glinting in the cold November sun. Over 1,000 B-17s from the 8th Air Force crossed the Rhine, escorted by waves of P-51 Mustangs. It was not a single raid. It was judgment delivered in formation. German spotters could hardly believe their eyes. So many, it looked like a city in the air, one recalled. Sirens wailed. Anti-aircraft batteries opened fire in desperate rhythm, filling the sky with black bursts. But the fortresses did not break. They held formation, level, relentless, unwavering. At 27,000 feet, the bomb bay doors opened. The city below disappeared in a veil of flame and smoke. The roar was continuous, rolling like thunder trapped between the clouds and earth. Factories, rail yards, and fuel depots, all ignited in sequence. Berlin's sky turned into a glowing storm, and for the first time, the German capital understood what total war truly meant. In the control towers, Luftwaffe officers watched their radar screens turn blank, their fighters grounded by fuel shortages and chaos. The once proud air arm of the Reich could only stare upward as the fortresses ruled the air unchallenged, and amid the inferno, one symbol endured: the droning hum of 4 engines, circling back toward the channel. The sound became the chorus of inevitability, the mechanical hymn of a war tilting toward its end. Inside the cockpits, American crews flew through chaos that defied comprehension. The air smelled of cordite and burning oil. Every burst of flak rocked the B-17s, yet the pilots held their course, eyes fixed on instruments blurred by vibration. They called it riding through hell. But there was a rhythm to it now. Precision, coordination, the kind that only thousands of hours and thousands of losses could forge. One fortress, Miss Donna May II, took a direct hit near Tempelhof. Flames spread across the fuselage, but the pilot stayed at altitude long enough to release the payload before the aircraft broke apart. His sacrifice meant one more rail junction destroyed, one less train reaching the front. This was the cruel arithmetic of strategic bombing. Every loss a step closer to the breaking point of an empire. Below, civilians poured into shelters as the sky itself burned. For years, Goebbels' propaganda had promised that the Reich's capital was safe, that no enemy could penetrate its defenses. Now the truth roared above them. Berlin's invincibility was an illusion, shattered by the thunder of engines built in Detroit, Seattle, and Wichita. In the aftermath, observers described the skyline as a second sunset, red, violent, unending. The B-17's roar faded westward, leaving silence so heavy it felt physical. Smoke spiraled upward like the ghosts of factories that once armed the Reich. For the German pilots grounded on the runways, the humiliation was unbearable. Their Messerschmitts sat idle, starved of fuel, while America's industrial heart continued to pour fire across an ocean. The myth of German air superiority, once absolute, was gone, erased by the steady pulse of American power. When the fires finally dimmed over Berlin, reconnaissance photographs revealed what the human eye could barely comprehend. Whole districts, Moabit, Friedrichshain, Tempelhof, reduced to lattices of ash and metal. Rail yards once pulsing, with supplies for the Eastern Front, were now twisted wreckage. The Reichsbahn's arteries had been severed. Intelligence reports later confirmed that aircraft production in the Berlin area dropped by nearly 40% within weeks. Engine factories like the BMW plant in Spandau lay silent, their roofs torn open by 500-pound bombs. What began as an attempt to cripple Germany's industry had evolved into something far greater: the psychological unmasking of Nazi invincibility. For the German populace, the myth had died overnight. No speech from Goebbels could resurrect it. The same citizens who once lined the streets to cheer returning pilots now stood in food lines among rubble. The Luftwaffe's elite aces, Galland, Barkhorn, Rahl, were forced to admit what they had denied for years. The skies now belonged to the Americans. Meanwhile, on British airfields, the surviving crews of the 8th Air Force stood silently beside their bullet-riddled fortresses. Mechanics counted the holes in each fuselage. Crews shared coffee in tin cups, too tired to speak. Out of 700 aircraft, 63 had not returned. But for the first time, the loss felt like progress, not sacrifice in vain. Berlin had been reached, bombed, and shaken to its core. The mission was more than military success. It was symbolic retribution. The same city that once broadcast Hitler's speeches to the world now echoed with the hum of American engines fading westward. And yet, in that eerie silence, the war's weight only grew heavier. A reminder that victory, though certain, would demand everything. In the days that followed, German propaganda called it a terror raid. Yet behind closed doors, Nazi officials knew the truth. It was precision. Reports from the Luftwaffe's own staff confirmed that American bombs had struck industrial targets with unprecedented accuracy. The Reich's command structure began to fracture under the weight of reality. Factories could be rebuilt. Morale could not. The idea of German air superiority, once the pride of Göring's Luftwaffe, was now a memory buried beneath the rubble of Berlin. Fighter units were recalled from France, Italy, and even Norway, desperate to protect the capital. But the numbers told a cruel story. The U.S. Army Air Forces could produce in 1 month what Germany struggled to replace in a year. In America, newspapers printed photographs of returning crews. The headlines called them heroes, but the faces told another story. Exhaustion, loss, and the quiet realization of what their bombs had done. They weren't destroying a distant enemy anymore. They were dismantling an empire's illusion. Each returning fortress carried more than ammunition scars. It carried a message. That freedom, though imperfect, could mobilize a nation stronger than tyranny ever could. The rumble of the B-17s had become the sound of inevitability. In Berlin, survivors picked through smoking ruins. Among them, one object stood untouched, a bent, dented piece of aluminum marked with a single white star. Children mistook it for a sign from heaven. In truth, it was the insignia of the U.S. 8th Air Force, the symbol of a democratic industrial power the world had underestimated. The city that once believed it could not fall had now seen the dawn of its own undoing. The skies above Berlin never returned to silence. Long after the last B-17 had turned for home, the echo of those engines lingered, a deep, resonant hum that carried the weight of industrial willpower and human endurance. To many Germans, it was the sound of defeat. But to history, it became something else entirely. The moment the balance of the air war shifted from courage to capacity, the B-17 Flying Fortress was more than metal and rivets. It was an airborne embodiment of democracy's hidden strength, cooperation, scale, and sacrifice. Every gun turret, every engine part, every bomb site was a piece of a vast collective effort stretching from Kansas to California. Farmers, machinists, and mothers built what soldiers would fly, and that unity became its own form of weapon. German pilots, who once mocked the heavy bombers as lumbering giants, came to see them as a relentless tide. No single fortress could destroy a city, but together they represented something greater than firepower. They represented the American belief that freedom, once threatened, could organize itself into thunder. The war would rage on, and other cities would burn. But Berlin's raid marked more than destruction. It marked awakening. For Germany, it was the realization that their technological mastery could not outlast the enemy's industry. For America, it was the sobering knowledge that democracy could wield terrible power and bear its moral weight. When historians look back, they often speak of the sound of the B-17s, that steady roar above the clouds. To the crews, it was the heartbeat of survival. To the Germans below, it was the sound of inevitability. But to the world, it became a symbol, proof that free men, united by purpose, could outbuild tyranny itself. In the end, Berlin's sky turned to fire not because of hatred, but because of resolve, a nation's determination to prove that liberty, though slow to rise, could one day blot out the sun. And when the smoke cleared, freedom's light fragile yet unbroken, shone through.